At my father's birthday dinner, they made a toast and guess and didn't invite me up. Welcome back. Hit that like button, share with your friends, and subscribe. Today's story will blow your mind. I never thought silence could be this loud. You'd think a restaurant full of laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of piano jazz couldn't possibly feel empty. But that night, it did. The air was thick with the kind of comfort that comes from familiarity, except none of it felt familiar to me. The walls were draped in warm amber light, and every table seemed to glow with small conversations, fragments of lives intertwining, all except mine. My father sat at the head of the long table, his face lit by the soft flicker of a candle, smiling that same proud, controlled smile I'd grown up studying like a map. He was the center of it all, the magnet that drew everyone's attention. And tonight, he deserved it. His 60th birthday, a milestone, a lifetime of accomplishments, the man of the hour. And me, I was the son who almost didn't show up. I'd arrived 10 minutes late because of course I had. The universe has a strange way of amplifying your smallest mistakes on the nights that matter most. My mother gave me that polite, brittle smile when I walked in, the one that said, "You're late, but at least you came." My younger sister Claire didn't even look up. She was too busy adjusting her wine glass, laughing at something my father's business partner said. I took my seat at the far end, 2 spots away from my father, as if even the seating arrangement knew where I stood. Dinner unfolded like a script they'd all rehearsed without me. Toasts came and went, some heartfelt, some obligatory. My father's colleagues told stories about his work ethic, his leadership, his integrity. My mother said something poetic about a man whose love built this family, and everyone clinked their glasses like a cue in a movie. And I just sat there, watching. I tried to join in, laugh at the right moments, nod along when someone mentioned how I must have inherited my dad's determination. But it all felt distant, like I was watching through glass. I noticed small things instead: the condensation on my untouched glass of water, the way my sister's diamond bracelet caught the light every time she raised her hand, the slow burn of resentment in my chest that I'd been trying to drown for years. Then the moment happened, the one that stuck like a thorn in my memory, long after the night ended. After dessert, after the waiter cleared the plates and the piano music softened, my father stood up. The table quieted instantly, as it always did when he spoke. He had that presence, the kind that filled a room even before he said a word. He smiled, raised his glass, and said, "I want to make a toast." I remember the pause before he spoke again. I remember the sound of someone's bracelet clinking against a glass, the faint hiss of the espresso machine at the bar, and my heartbeat and steady, waiting. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he said. "It means more than I can say to have my family and friends gathered to celebrate. Well, 60 years of trying to make sense of this life." Laughter, warm, practiced. He went on, talking about gratitude, legacy, love, the kind of words that sound deep but don't really land unless you're the one they're meant for. Then he said, "I'd like to invite a few people to share a few words too. People who've been a big part of this journey." I straightened in my seat. Maybe this was it. Maybe, despite everything, I'd get my moment to speak. He turned first to his best friend, Richard, then his brother, then Claire. When he called her name, she looked radiant. Her smile immediate, natural. She stood, cheeks flushed with wine and joy, and gave a speech that made people tear up. She talked about how he taught her to drive, how he'd always believed in her, how she wanted to make him proud. And when she ended with, "Happy birthday, Dad," the table erupted in applause. He stood, hugged her tight, kissed her forehead. Then he looked at me. Our eyes met for a split second. I swear I could see the thought flicker in his mind. A silent debate. The hesitation was brief, but it was there. And then he turned back to the table. "Thank you, Claire," he said. "That was beautiful." He didn't call my name. Instead, he looked at his watch, laughed, and said, "All right, everyone, let's have a drink." The moment passed, swallowed by laughter and chatter. But in my head, everything stopped. I smiled. Or tried to. I even raised my glass like the rest, pretending I hadn't noticed, pretending it didn't sting. But inside, it was like something had quietly cracked open. because it wasn't just that he didn't invite me up. It was the realization that he hadn't even thought to, that I wasn't part of his story anymore. Later, when people drifted toward the bar and the servers began clearing the table, I sat there in the afterglow of their laughter, tracing the rim of my glass with my thumb. My father was surrounded by people, shaking hands, laughing with that effortless charm that made everyone love him. He didn't even glance my way. Claire caught my eye once across the room. She smiled, the kind of smile you give to a stranger you vaguely recognize. I thought about leaving right then, just walking out, calling a cab, disappearing. But something held me there. Maybe pride, maybe masochism. I told myself I'd wait for the right moment to talk to him, to tell him that I was proud of him too, even if he didn't want to hear it. But the right moment never came. It was after 11 when the crowd started thinning. My mother was busy thanking the staff, my father was still holding court near the bar, and Claire was taking selfies with her friends. I stepped outside for air. The night was cold, the kind that seeps through your jacket and makes your breath visible. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I leaned against one of the pillars and pulled out my phone. There was a text from my ex. Hope tonight went well. Call me if you need to talk. I almost laughed. She always had a knack for knowing when I was drowning. When I went back inside, the room was quieter, emptier. My father was finally alone, standing by the bar with a half-finished glass of scotch. His shoulders looked heavy, his expression unreadable. For a second, he looked almost human. I walked up. "Good night, Dad." He turned, surprised, maybe even relieved. "Hey," he said, smiling faintly. "You heading out?" "Yeah, long day tomorrow." Right. "Work." He nodded like he was trying to remember what it was I even did these days. I hesitated. It was a good night. It was. He glanced toward the empty tables, then back at me. "You know, it meant a lot that you came. I know things have been strained." I almost said strained? You think that's what this is? But I didn't. I just nodded. "Yeah, I'm glad I came too." He smiled again, that practiced smile. "That's good. We should catch up soon. Maybe lunch next week?" "Sure," I said, though we both knew it wouldn't happen. He put a hand on my shoulder, brief and awkward, then turned back to finish his drink. I left before the silence swallowed us again. Outside, the air felt colder than before. I started walking toward my car, my reflection trailing behind me in the glass windows of the restaurant. I could still hear the faint laughter inside, like an echo from a world I didn't belong to anymore. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in the dark living room, listening to the ticking of the clock. Somewhere between the silence and the exhaustion, the anger began to settle into something else. Not forgiveness, not understanding, but something quieter. That's when I noticed the envelope on the table. It had my name written in my father's handwriting. No note, no context, just an envelope, slightly creased, as if it had been carried around for a while. I opened it slowly, expecting maybe a card, a late apology, something small. Inside was a single photograph. It was old, the edges yellowed, the image slightly faded. My father holding a little boy in his arms. Me, at maybe 5 or 6 years old, grinning with missing teeth. On the back in his handwriting were 4 words. "Don't forget this smile." I sat there for a long time, staring at that photo. I didn't know if it was meant as kindness or guilt or both. But the part that hurt the most wasn't what the note said. It was the memory it brought back. The last time he'd ever looked at me that way. That was 24 years ago. And something deep down told me that night, sitting in that empty room, that whatever had broken between us hadn't just been distance or time. It was something buried, something I wasn't supposed to find. But I did. And it started with that photograph. I didn't sleep that night. The photo sat on the coffee table, the candlelight flickering across it, as if the image itself were breathing. I kept staring at my father's face in the picture, younger, softer, eyes full of pride. I barely recognized him. Maybe that's what made it worse. The words on the back, "Don't forget this smile," echoed in my head long after midnight. They weren't comforting. They felt like a warning, like a prelude to something I didn't yet understand. I must have dozed off sometime near dawn because the next thing I remember was the faint light of morning bleeding through the curtains. My phone buzzed. A message from Claire. Morning. Last night was nice. Dad wants everyone for brunch Sunday. You coming? I stared at the screen for a long moment, thumb hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her exactly what I'd felt sitting there, invisible while she toasted the man who forgot I existed. But instead, I typed, sure. What time? Old habits die hard. By Sunday, I'd convinced myself that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the missing invitation, the envelope, all of it, Warstick Eat, was just the messy residue of a complicated relationship. Maybe my father had left that photo to remind me that, somewhere beneath all the distance and silence, he still cared. But when I arrived at their house that morning, the feeling returned. That strange tightness in my chest that always came with crossing their threshold. The house was the same as always, pristine, curated, like it belonged in a magazine. My mother's touch was everywhere, and vases of fresh lilies, polished floors, framed photos arranged like trophies. The smell of coffee and baked bread filled the air, but beneath it lingered something else. Tension, maybe, or history. Morning, my mother said when I walked in. She was arranging pastries on a platter, her movements brisk, efficient. You're early, that's new. I smiled faintly. Traffic was lighter than usual. Good. She didn't look up. Claire and your father are in the garden. I nodded, wandering toward the back door. The garden was perfectly trimmed, the grass wet from morning dew. My father was sitting at the table reading something on his tablet while Claire stood beside him, animatedly talking about a new project at work. They looked like a painting: sunlight, laughter, ease. When Claire saw me, she waved. Hey, you made it! Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. My father looked up, squinting against the light. Morning, son, he said. Coffee? Sure. He poured me a cup and slid it across the table. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Then Claire started talking about the upcoming family trip. Something I hadn't even heard about. Dad booked this amazing place by the coast, she said. Big old house right on the cliffs. You're going to love it. I blinked. Wait, what trip? She froze for half a second. Oh, I thought Mom told you. No, she didn't. My father cleared his throat. It was sort of a last-minute idea. A family getaway before the holidays. We didn't think you'd be free with work. I stared at him. You didn't ask. He set his tablet down slowly. I didn't want to pressure you. You've seemed distant lately. I almost laughed at the irony. Right, distant. Claire shifted uncomfortably. Come on, it's not a big deal. You can still come. We've got room. But I could tell from the flicker of guilt in her eyes that my seat had already been taken by someone else. That's when I noticed something odd. On the edge of the garden table, half hidden beneath a stack of mail, was another photograph. It was face down, but I recognized the faint yellowed edges, the same type of old print as the one my father left me. I reached for it without thinking, curiosity overriding caution. Hey, what's this? My father's tone sharpened. Leave that. I froze, the edge of the photo between my fingers. He reached over, grabbed it, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Just something I found while cleaning the study, he said quickly. But his voice had that tremor, the one that comes when someone's lying through their teeth. I tried to read his expression, but he was already standing, brushing invisible dust from his sleeves. I'll get more coffee, he muttered, disappearing inside. Claire frowned. What was that about? I shrugged. No idea. But I knew, or at least I was starting to. Later, while they were distracted setting the table, I slipped into my father's study. I told myself it wasn't snooping. Not really. I just wanted to understand. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. Sunlight cut through the blinds in thin, perfect lines, illuminating the dust in the air. The shelves were lined with books, framed awards, and photographs, some new, some old. But one section of the wall caught my eye. It was a collage of family pictures, birthdays, graduations, holidays, all carefully arranged. Except one frame was missing. An empty space, the outline of dust showing where it had once been. I opened the drawer of his desk. Inside was a small box of old photos, yellowed and curled. There I was in several of them, as a child, laughing, with my father beside me. But as I sifted through the pile, something shifted. The pictures started changing. I wasn't in them anymore. Just my father, my mother, Claire, the three of them smiling, standing in front of places I didn't recognize. And then, near the bottom of the stack, one photo stopped me cold. It was my father, holding a baby. But it wasn't me. The child had lighter hair, smaller features. On the back of the photo, written in the same careful handwriting as the first one, were three words: for her, always. My breath caught. I stood there, the photograph trembling in my hands, trying to make sense of it. The date on the back was from the year I was born, but the child wasn't me. I slipped the photo into my pocket and left the study just as I heard footsteps approaching. My father appeared in the doorway, mug in hand. He looked at me, then at the desk. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Suspicion, maybe. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just looking for the restroom." He nodded slowly, but he didn't move. "Down the hall," he said. "Second door." I walked past him, feeling the weight of the photo against my thigh. Lunch was quiet after that. My mother talked about trivial things. Claire scrolled through her phone. My father smiled and nodded at all the right moments. But I could feel the air shift between us, the subtle tension of something unspoken. When it was finally time to leave, my father walked me to the door. "Drive safe," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. For a moment, I wanted to ask him everything: who that baby was, why he'd hidden the photos, why the look in his eyes had changed when he saw me holding one. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded and walked out. The photo burned in my pocket all the way home. That night, I laid it beside the first one on my table. Two different worlds, same handwriting. Don't forget this smile. For her, always. It didn't make sense. Unless it did. Unless there was something about our family I'd never been told. I tried calling my mother later that evening, but she didn't pick up. Claire texted asking if everything was okay. I didn't reply. Instead, I found myself driving. Nowhere in particular, just moving. The streets were empty. The city's glow distant and cold. My thoughts spiraled. Who was the child in the photo? A cousin? A friend's baby? Or someone else entirely? I ended up parked outside their house again, engine idling, headlights off. The windows were dark except for the faint glow in my father's study upstairs. His silhouette moved across the blinds, pacing, pausing, pacing again. He was hiding something, and for the first time in years, I wasn't going to let it go. The next day, I went to visit my aunt, my father's younger sister, Lillian. She lived alone in a quiet neighborhood a few towns over, in a house that smelled of cinnamon and old memories. She'd always been the odd one out, blunt, sharp, and too honest for family dinners. When she opened the door, she looked surprised. "Well, if it isn't the prodigal son," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "Hey, Aunt Lil. What brings you here? It's not Christmas yet." I hesitated. "I need to ask you something about Dad." Her expression shifted. "What about him?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo, the one with the other baby. She froze when she saw it. "Where did you get this?" "It was in his study." She took the picture, staring at it for a long time. Her hand trembled slightly. "So it's true," she whispered. "What's true?" She looked up at me, eyes glassy, voice low. "Your father swore he'd burned these." "Who is she?" I asked, my voice barely holding steady. Aunt Lil exhaled slowly. "Her name was Anna." "Anna?" "She was your father's first child." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the table to keep my balance. "I don't understand," I said. "He and Mom." "She wasn't with him then. This was before. A long time ago. Before he met your mother. Anna's mother, she died young, a car accident. Your father took it hard. He never talked about it. When he married your mom, She hesitated. He made himself start over, pretend it never happened. I sank into the chair, my chest tightening. Does Mom know? Lillian nodded. Of course. She found out after Claire was born. There was a fight. He wanted to find Anna again, or at least visit her grave. Your mother wanted to forget it all. They made a deal, I think. Silence. I felt the air leave my lungs. So that's what those photos were, I said. Reminders. Reminders or guilt, she said softly. Take your pick. The words echoed in the quiet room. When I left her house, the sun was already setting, the sky bruised purple and gold. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the road, unable to move. A sister, a secret buried for decades. And suddenly, that toast, that missing invitation, the distance, the careful way my father looked at me like he couldn't quite see me. It all started to make a terrible kind of sense. Because maybe, when he looked at me, he didn't just see his son. Maybe he saw the ghost of the one he lost. I didn't drive home right away. The highway stretched before me like an endless ribbon, the world moving too fast outside the windshield while everything inside me slowed to a crawl. The information hung in my mind like smoke, thick, impossible to breathe through. Anna. The name felt fragile on my tongue, like a word that wasn't meant to be spoken aloud. My father had another child, a daughter. A life before me that he'd buried so completely I never even felt its shadow. Until now. I pulled over on the side of the road just to catch my breath. Cars swept past, their headlights streaking white against the darkening fields. I turned off the engine and sat there, listening to the faint hum of the night. There was a strange kind of clarity that came with it, the realization that my entire life had been built on half-truths, that maybe my father's silence had never been indifference. It was grief, disguised as distance. But then another thought crept in, quieter, colder. If Anna had died before I was born, why did my father still have recent photos of her? The one I'd found wasn't decades old. It wasn't a grainy film print from the 90s. It was newer, glossier, sharper, like it had been printed in the last few years. And the date on the back. 2007. That was the year after my mother's breakdown. I turned the photo over again, tracing the ink with my thumb. For her, always. The handwriting wasn't shaky or aged, and it was deliberate, recent. That meant she wasn't dead. Or if she was, someone had lied. The next few days were a blur. I went to work, answered emails, sat in meetings, all on autopilot. My mind was somewhere else entirely, replaying that conversation with Aunt Lil, dissecting every pause, every hesitation. On the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove back to my parents' house. The lights were off except for the one in my father's study. Through the window, I saw him at his desk, same as before. Motionless, staring at something in his hands. I didn't knock. I let myself in with the spare key under the flower pot. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Every creak of the floorboards felt amplified, intrusive. When I reached the study door, I paused. My reflection stared back at me in the glass. Older, harder, a stranger to the boy in that first photograph. Then I opened the door. He looked up instantly, startled. Jesus, you scared me. Sorry, I said, didn't mean to. He frowned. It's after 10. What are you doing here? I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. I wanted to talk. About what? About Anna. The silence that followed was suffocating. He froze completely, his jaw tightening, eyes darting to the drawer of his desk like he could hide the word somewhere. I don't know what you're talking about, he said quietly. Don't, I said. Please, I've seen the photos. I talked to Aunt Lil. He exhaled through his nose, rubbed his temples. That woman should have kept her mouth shut. So it's true, I said. You had another child? He didn't answer right away. He stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the dark lawn. She wasn't just another child, he said finally. His voice was low, brittle. She was my first. The confession hung in the air between us. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because it wasn't your burden to carry. I almost laughed. My burden? She's my sister. You erased her. He turned, eyes sharp. You think that was easy? You think I wanted that? Then why? Because your mother couldn't stand it, he snapped. She told me if I ever mentioned her again, she'd leave. And after what happened? He stopped himself. I stepped closer. After what? He sank into his chair, his shoulders slumped. After the night Anna disappeared. The words hit me like ice water. Disappeared? He nodded slowly. She was 16. We'd lost touch for a few years after her mother died, but she'd found me, wanted to reconnect. I was thrilled. We met a few times. Quietly. Your mother didn't know. But then one night she came to the house. Unexpected. She and your mother argued. It got ugly. And the next day, Anna was gone. I stared at him, unable to process it. Gone? You mean she ran away? They said so. The police called it voluntary disappearance, but I knew better. Something was wrong. The room felt smaller suddenly. The walls seemed to close in. And Mom? I asked. He hesitated. She swore she had nothing to do with it. I wanted to believe her. I still do. But there are nights I wake up and wonder. He trailed off, his hands trembling. I swallowed hard. And you've just lived with that? He nodded. For years. I tried to find her, hired people, nothing. Then 2 years ago, someone sent me a letter. He opened the drawer, pulled out an envelope, and slid it across the desk. I hesitated before picking it up. The paper was old, worn at the edges, the handwriting small and neat. Inside was a single line. You should have told him the truth. No name, no address, just that. I looked up at him. Told who? His eyes met mine, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear there. You, he said quietly. It was meant for you. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Why me? I whispered. Because maybe, he said, voice trembling, the truth wasn't what I thought it was. I wanted to ask more. 1,000 questions clawing at the back of my throat. But the sound of footsteps in the hallway made us both turn. My mother stood in the doorway, her expression cold, controlled. What are you doing? She asked, her tone calm but sharp as glass. Mom, I said, my voice uneven. We were just talking about things that should stay buried? She cut in. My father stood, his voice soft. He had a right to know. Her eyes flashed. A right? You think dragging him into your guilt is helping anyone? Enough, he said. But she stepped closer, her voice rising. You promised me, David. You promised you'd never bring her up again. I didn't bring her up. He found her. They stared at each other. Two ghosts bound by a secret neither wanted to face. I looked between them, my pulse hammering. What happened that night? Neither spoke. I took a step forward. Tell me. My mother's jaw clenched. You wouldn't understand. Try me. Her eyes flicked to my father, then back to me. You think you know him, don't you? Your perfect, noble father, but he's not who you think he is. Margaret, my father said, warning in his tone. She ignored him. He didn't just lose that girl. He drove her away. The night she came here, they fought. He accused her of being a liar, said she wasn't his. She left in tears. The next morning, she was gone. He made me swear to say nothing. My father's face went pale. That's not what happened. Isn't it? She hissed. Tell him about the DNA test, David. My breath caught. What DNA test? He stared at her, speechless. Tell him, she said again, voice cracking now. Tell him how you sent that sample behind my back. How you couldn't stand the idea that she wasn't really yours. He looked at me, eyes wide, desperate. It wasn't like that. Then what was it? I demanded. He pressed his hands to his face, voice barely audible. The results came back inconclusive. I didn't know what to believe. She stopped answering my calls after that. I tried to find her, but it was too late. My mother's expression softened slightly, but her voice trembled with exhaustion. We built this family out of the ashes of that mistake. I just wanted peace. I felt sick. So instead, you both just erased her? Neither of them answered. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable. Finally, I turned to leave. "Where are you going?" my father asked. "To find her," I said. He reached out, but I pulled away. "Don't," I said. "You've done enough." I left the house without looking back. The cold air hit me like a slap, clearing the fog from my mind. I didn't have a plan, just a direction. Forward. That night, I dug through everything. Old records, addresses, online archives, every mention of the name Anna Porter. There were too many hits to count, but one caught my attention. A social media profile, inactive for years, but with a location tag from a small coastal town 3 hours away. A coincidence, maybe, but something about it felt right. The next morning, I packed a bag, got in the car, and drove. The farther I got from the city, the quieter the world became. The air grew saltier, the roads narrower, until finally I saw the ocean, vast and gray, crashing against the cliffs. The town was small, almost forgotten. Wooden houses, faded paint, gulls circling overhead. I parked near a diner and went inside. An older waitress looked up as I entered. "Coffee?" "Sure," I said. As she poured, I pulled out my phone, showing her the faded picture. "Have you seen her before? Maybe years ago?" She studied it, squinting. "Looks familiar. Might have worked at the old bookstore down the street. Closed a few years back." "Do you remember her name?" She nodded slowly. "Anna. Sweet girl. Kept to herself. Left town suddenly. Nobody knew why." My pulse quickened. "Do you know where she went?" The woman shook her head. "No idea. But she used to get mail here at the post office across the street. You could try there." I thanked her and left. The post office was nearly empty, the smell of paper and dust filling the air. An older man behind the counter looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone. Anna Porter used to live here." He frowned. "Porter? Yeah, that rings a bell. She forwarded her mail a while back." "To where?" He hesitated. "I'm not really supposed to—" "It's important," I said quietly. He studied me for a moment, then scribbled something on a scrap of paper. "Don't tell anyone I gave you this." I looked down. An address. When I saw the name of the town, my stomach turned to ice. It was only 20 minutes from my parents' beach house. The road curved along the cliffs like a scar, tracing the edge of the sea. The wind whipped across the car, carrying salt and memory. I followed the address the old postmaster had given me, the paper crumpled and worn in my hand, as though I'd been holding onto it for years instead of hours. The town near my parents' beach house was smaller than I remembered, a cluster of cottages with paint peeling from years of salt air, a lighthouse at the far end of the shore. I'd been here once as a child, though the details were fuzzy. My father carrying me on his shoulders, my mother shouting for us to stay close to the rocks. I remembered her laugh echoing off the waves, a sound that now seemed impossibly distant. The address led me down a narrow side road, lined with weathered fences and hydrangea bushes that had lost most of their color for the season. The house was small, almost fragile looking, pale blue with a sagging porch and curtains drawn tight against the daylight. There was a mailbox at the edge of the path, the name on it barely legible through rust and peeling paint. A. Porter. My hands shook as I stepped out of the car. Every sound felt amplified. The crunch of gravel under my shoes, the wind rustling through dry leaves, the distant crash of waves against the cliffs below. For a long time, I just stood there, unsure of what I'd say if someone actually answered the door. I rehearsed a dozen versions of the truth in my head. "I'm your brother. Our father's been looking for you. You were never forgotten." But none of it felt right. Finally, I forced myself forward and knocked. Once, twice. No answer. I waited, listening. There was no movement inside, but through the crack in the curtain, I saw the faint flicker of a light, like a candle or an old lamp still burning. I tried again. "Anna?" Silence. I turned to leave, but something made me stop. A feeling, a pulse of instinct I couldn't name. I looked down and noticed a stack of mail by the door, all addressed to the same name. The top envelope was postmarked just last week. Someone was still living here. I reached for it, hesitated, then heard the faint creak of a floorboard inside. My heart stuttered. The door opened a few inches. A woman stood in the shadowed doorway, her face half hidden by the dim light behind her. She was older than I expected, maybe mid-30s, but there was something familiar about her, something that hit me like a memory trying to resurface. Her eyes, the shape of her mouth. "Can I help you?" she asked quietly. For a second, my voice failed me. I, I'm sorry, are you Anna Porter?" She didn't answer right away. Her expression flickered. Surprise, then caution. "Who's asking?" "My name is—" I stopped. My throat felt tight. "I think we might be related." She didn't move. The silence between us stretched thin, trembling. Finally, she stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her. The light from inside haloed her outline, soft and uncertain. "What do you mean, related?" I took a slow breath. "Our father is David Porter." The name hit her like a wave. I saw it, and the way her body stiffened, her eyes widening slightly, the breath she didn't take. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly, turning to go back inside. "Please," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop it. "I just need to talk. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to understand." She paused, her hand on the doorknob. Then, after a long moment, she opened the door wider. "5 minutes," she said. "That's all." The inside of the house was quiet, filled with the smell of old wood and lavender. Everything was neat, deliberate, a life lived carefully. There were books stacked on the coffee table, a teapot steaming faintly in the kitchen, a single framed photograph on the mantel. It was her, younger, smiling, standing beside a woman with kind eyes. Her mother, I thought. She caught me looking. "You've been to our house before, haven't you?" I asked softly. Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "My father said you came once, years ago." Something passed across her face. Not surprise this time, but pain. "I shouldn't have," she said. "It was a mistake." "Why?" "Because your mother made sure I knew I didn't belong." Her voice cracked slightly, but she steadied it. "I was 16. I just wanted to meet him, to know something about where I came from. But when she saw me at the door—" She trailed off, her gaze distant. "She said I'd ruin everything, that he'd moved on, that I was better off gone." I felt something twist in my chest. "He told me you disappeared, that he looked for you." She gave a small, bitter smile. "He didn't look hard enough." I wanted to argue, but her tone left no room for it. "Do you still keep in touch with him?" she asked suddenly. "Barely. Last night was the first time we'd spoken honestly in years." She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "Then you probably already know he lied about more than me." I hesitated. "What do you mean?" She stood, crossed the room, and opened a drawer in the old wooden cabinet near the window. From it, she pulled out a thin folder, worn, filled with papers and a few photographs. She laid it on the table between us. "I kept everything," she said. "Every letter he sent, every one I wrote back, every unanswered message." I flipped through the pages. Some of the letters were handwritten, some typed. But the last few were different. They weren't addressed to her. They were from a law office. "Wait," I said, scanning one of them. "These are custody documents." She nodded. "He tried to claim me, said he wanted to make things right, but it wasn't about love. It was guilt. He wanted to fix the story, not the truth." I looked up. "Why didn't you let him?" "Because I wasn't his to fix," she said softly. "He knew that." The words hung between us, sharp and fragile. "What are you saying?" She met my eyes. "There was a test. He didn't tell you that, did he?" I felt my pulse quicken. "He mentioned it. He said the results were inconclusive." Her lips parted, a short, humorless laugh. "Of course he did." She reached into the folder again and pulled out a single folded paper, yellowed at the edges. "He got the results. I saw them. It wasn't inconclusive." I took it from her, my fingers trembling. The letterhead was from a genetics lab. At the bottom, highlighted in faint ink, were the words that hollowed me out from the inside. "Probability of paternity, 0%. I looked up at her, but she wasn't watching me. She was staring out the window at the distant, endless sea. He wasn't my father, she said quietly. And he knew it, but he couldn't accept it. So he built a family and pretended none of this ever happened. The paper shook in my hands. Then why keep the photos? The letters? The name on your mailbox? She turned back to me. Because he might not have been my father. But for a moment, before everything fell apart, I believed he was. There was a silence then. Deep, almost sacred. I could hear the distant cry of gulls, the slow ticking of the clock on her wall. And then she said, "You should go." I wanted to protest, but the look in her eyes stopped me. It wasn't anger, it was finality. When I stepped outside, the wind had changed. The air smelled of salt and rain. I stood by the car, the letter still in my hand, the weight of it settling over me like fog. If she wasn't my father's daughter, then who was she to him? And why had he hidden everything like a crime? I drove back to the cliffs overlooking the water, parking near the same old beach house we used to visit when I was young. The windows were dark, the waves below churning violently against the rocks. I sat there for a long time, the paper spread out on the dashboard, watching the ink blur in the condensation from my breath. My father's voice echoed in my head. You should have told him the truth, but now I wasn't sure who the truth belonged to anymore. I pulled out my phone, hesitated, and finally called him. He answered on the second ring. Hello? It's me, I said. My voice sounded distant, hollow. I found her. A pause. Anna? Yes. Silence. Then softly. Is she okay? She's alive, I said. But you lied. He didn't argue. I know. She showed me the results. I know. He said again, voice breaking. I just wanted to believe otherwise. I needed to. Why? He hesitated, then said something that sent a chill through me. Because she wasn't mine, but you were hers. The line went silent. What do you mean? I whispered. Come home, he said. Please, I'll explain everything. But I didn't move. The waves crashed harder below, the sound like a heartbeat breaking against the shore. For the first time in my life, I realized that the story of my family wasn't about who belonged to whom. It was about what they were willing to bury to keep from breaking apart. And somehow, I had become the one left, holding all the pieces. I drove back through the night, the road unraveling beneath the headlights like a thread leading me home. The city felt different now, colder, emptier. By the time I reached my father's house, the sky was starting to pale, that faint gray before dawn when everything feels fragile. He was waiting by the window. No words at first, just the silence between us, stretched thin like glass. His face looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow, worn down by the weight of everything unsaid. I set the letter on the table. You said she wasn't yours, I said quietly, but you also said I was hers. What did you mean? He sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. Your mother, he began, voice shaking. Before we married, she had a relationship, a brief one. She told me it ended, that she wanted to move on. And we did. But years later, when you were born, he stopped, his breath catching. There were doubts. I didn't want to believe them. I stared at him. You mean? He nodded slowly. I took the same test she did, but I burned the results before she ever saw them. I didn't care what they said. You were my son, and I wasn't going to let anyone change that. The room tilted. The air thickened around us. So, Anna? She was the one your mother wanted me to forget, he said. Her child with the man she once loved? I tried to fix it by loving you harder, by pretending none of it ever existed. But lies don't die, they just wait. My throat closed around the words I couldn't find. Every memory, every photograph, every dinner, every silence rearranged itself into something unrecognizable. I spent years resenting you, I said, my voice breaking, thinking you cared about her more than me, but it was all the same wound, wasn't it? He looked up, tears in his eyes. I never meant for you to inherit my mistakes. I nodded, unable to speak. When I finally left the house, the sun was rising. The light stretched across the street, soft and fragile, like forgiveness that wasn't ready to be spoken. I didn't look back. I just walked, through the quiet, through the ache, until the air felt clean again. The letter was still in my pocket, but I didn't need it anymore. Some truths, once found, don't set you free. They just show you how much of your life was built on someone else's silence. And now, as the story fades, I ask you, how much of the truth do we really want to know about the people we love? If every family secret were laid bare, would we find peace and honesty, or only deeper fractures in what we thought was unbreakable? Maybe the hardest part isn't discovering the lies. Maybe it's realizing that love and deception can live under the same roof, wearing the same familiar face.